The first section of this course, the first 6 modules, focused all on the core tools available in Astro. Here in the second section, I want to look at a bunch of additional tools that kind of extend the possibilities of Astro, either with third-party things or just with extra tools that give you kind of beyond the basic web dev experience. So that's what we're going to look at, starting with images here in Module 7. Now, in this very first lesson in Module 7, I want to overview a lot of what we're going to talk about in more depth, just so you kind of get a lay of the land, and then as we move through each lesson, we'll get more detailed for each of these items. Now, to follow along, you can open the image docs, which we will reference occasionally, and then you want to grab all the code in the description for this lesson. It should just be a zip file. Go ahead and unzip that, just npm I to install everything, and then npm run dev, and just should get you a page that looks just about like this. So nothing much going on. It's basically the basic core Astro project with simply an image thrown in this assets directory. So let's go ahead and start by talking about where you can place images. Now, essentially, there are 3 locations that you can use if you want to use images within your site. First of all, you can add it somewhere inside of this SRC directory. Conventionally, this is put inside of an assets directory, but you don't have to do that. Just anywhere inside of this SRC directory means Astro can touch the file and manipulate it on build. The other thing you can do is keep a file in this public directory. So why don't we just go ahead and copy this one over this way? This will be my public file in my public directory. Now, if you remember from earlier lessons, these public files are not touched by Astro. They're simply put at the root of your site whenever you go to build. And then there's finally a third location, which would be a remote image. That can be a remote image through a CDN, but the idea is it's basically not part of your site. It's some remote image somewhere on the internet. So those are our 3 options. Putting an image in the SRC directory means that Astro can touch that on build and manipulate it, optimize it, that kind of stuff. The public directory means it's always going to be at the root of your site on build, but Astro will not touch it or optimize it in any way. And finally, a remote image means it's remote. It lives somewhere else, but depending on how you use it in Astro, if you use their image component, you can actually do some optimization as well. So let's go ahead and start with just referencing this image right here. You can do that just by referencing it at the root of your site. So let's come in here. We'll say image, and then let's go ahead and grab that source image. We know it's just at the root of our site, and it was called image.jpg. Now, you probably also want to do an alt like Katie House, which I think is this girl's fake name, and then we'll close off the image tag. Now you'll notice as soon as I do that, the image comes in just fine. Again, this is at the root of the directory because it's used the public directory. So that's referencing a public directory image. We can also do the same thing if we want to from the assets directory or anywhere inside the SRC directory. I just conventionally put it inside of an assets folder. In order to do that though, I need to actually import it in this front matter. So I'll say import. We can name this image whatever we want. Let's just call it image from, and here I'm going to go up a level into my assets and then into image.jpg. Now all I have to do is come in here and grab this image, a reference to it, and pass it in down this way. So perhaps just for a separator, let's go ahead and say like this is the assets image, and we'll drop it in down here. Let's go ahead and copy this down this way. And instead of passing a string to the file, I'm going to actually pass in that image that we imported. Now, because it's the entire image, including its width, its height, a couple other properties, if I'm going to reference it just like this in a normal image tag, I need to do .src. In other words, that's the source of the actual image. The rest of that will be the exact same. And now you'll see I have 2 images, one from my public directory and one from the SRC directory. Now let's go ahead and come in here and inspect these things. I'm going to go ahead and select images and we'll reload the page. You'll notice they're the exact same image, so they're actually set the exact same way. So they're both 145 bytes. However, you'll notice something different with this second image. You'll notice that it's inferred several things from the image just by referencing it from my SRC directory. And in fact, if I jump over to the Elements tab and we look at it closer, you'll notice it gives all this stuff. The original width is 940, the original height is 940, the original format is JPEG. Now that already gives us a hint at what Astro can do to this image. But just to make it clear, again, where you can pull images from, an SRC directory, you have to import the image, and then you can use it by referencing the .src property. A public image, you can reference at the root of your site, just like we've done here, but you will not be able to optimize it in any way. And with remote images, and I won't show you this because it's the exact same as the public image, except that you have to provide the entire URL path. Now, in order to optimize it or take advantage of it, you've got 3 different tools available to you. So we've looked at those 3 locations. Let's now look at the 3 different tools you have available to you. First of all, I'm going to come over here to the image docs. You'll notice this is what we just looked at, SRC are public or remote images. Now what we're going to look at is the different options available to you. You're going to see a few things. This image component, this is the first one we'll talk about. Secondly, we're going to look at this picture component. And then finally, we're going to look at the server-side method they give you called getImage, which can essentially optimize images on the server, and then you can pass back a static file. So let's come back this way, and just as an example, we're going to leave this first one here so that we can see what the normal size of the file would be. The reason you'd want to use these helpers is because they can optimize your image for you. So what I'm going to do is just come over here, and instead of the normal image tag, I'm going to start to type image with a capital I. And the first thing we're going to notice is that I should have named this something else. So let's call this Katie, because I need to actually have the image name available to me. So we'll call this kd.src. Okay, so back over this way, if I hit Control and Spacebar, you'll notice I have this optional import from Astro:assets. I want to hit Enter, and that should import this up top, and it does. Cool. Now, what is this thing going to do? Well, at the end of the day, it's going to just print this all to a normal image tag, but it can do a bunch of optimizations first, and then essentially render just static HTML. Now, you'll notice that instead of passing the SRC, I'm actually going to pass the entire image. This includes all of its metadata as well. I'll just pass the whole thing to the image tag. By default, only doing that, it's going to optimize it, change it to a WebP image, and make it way smaller. So if I come back over here, you'll notice that I've got one. Actually, let's just reload it here. This first one is 506 kilobytes. The second one here is 55 kilobytes. You'll notice as well that it's changed it to a WebP image. And if I were to hover over here, you'll see that it's changed a bunch of things about it, changed the format, made sure I know the original size. And one of the things this helps with is not just the size of the image, but also content layout shift. In other words, it's reserved the space it needs for this image so your content isn't shifting around as your page loads. Now, instead of using just the plain old image, you can also use something called the picture. So I'll go ahead and reload that, and so far it doesn't look any different, but if I jump back in here, we select this, you'll notice that something else has happened. I've got the image tag just the same as before, but it's actually wrapped it in this picture element. Now, eventually this is going to set us up to have a bunch of different options. So for instance, we can have multiple different sources like WebP images or AVIF images, or like a fallback JPEG image if I want. I can also have different densities, so pixel densities based on the user's device. So there's a lot of different options in this picture tag if you want to use that instead. The next lesson, we're going to look more thoroughly at what you can do with each of these, starting with the image element. So let me come back over here and just give you a quick preview. One of the things you can do is you can say, hey, I want to set the width for this and set it to something like 40 pixels. Now notice as soon as I do that, it makes it way small. And on top of that, it's actually like literally created that size of an image. Now I'm just 898 bytes. And if I were to inspect the image, it really is that small. So it's actually made it 40 pixels wide, and by default, it keeps the same aspect ratio. So you can actually change the size. You can also change the format. So let's say I wanted to change it to something like AVIF. I can do that. And if I come over here, you'll notice that it's 945 bytes. So it's actually a little bit bigger in this case, but sometimes that will make it smaller. It's technically a more optimized image format depending on the image. Again, there are a lot more possibilities here that we're going to look at in the next lesson, like you can pass multiple widths for an image and let the browser decide which one to load. And essentially all you're doing is passing along the same kind of stuff you would pass to a normal HTML image tag, except that Astro does some magic and then in the end produces an HTML image tag. Now, the last thing to mention is the getImage function. If I come over here, you'll notice that this is server-side only. So it's important that you use it in places like this. So let's go ahead and just copy this as an example. I'm going to come over here and we'll just grab it like this. In this case, I need to go ahead and hit Control and Spacebar and pull that in. Secondly, the actual image is KD right here. And again, I would just pass the entire image. So you've got the same options available to you of format and width and all that kind of stuff, but it's all run server-side. Now, as you can see, this means you can do some things like, for instance, here I can just apply it as a background image directly here. So let's go ahead and grab this style tag, and I'll grab it just like this. And let's come down to the body, and let's just paste this in. If I come back over this way, you'll notice that I now got a background image of Katie House. Now, this can also be a really helpful tool if you're writing some functions that are going to process images and then spit back basically HTML at the end of the day. This actually returns an image object with all the different properties you may want access to. So let's go ahead and console log this just to see what it looks like. I'm going to come over this way and we'll open up the terminal. And down here, you'll notice I've got an actual SRC. I've got different source set attributes, so I can pass along anything I normally would to an image tag, like an ARIA attribute or anything else I might want. You'll notice it's also got the width, the height, and then loading and decoding attributes automatically applied. On top of that, you see all these different options here, where it gives me the original file format, the format it's going to, and everything else. All this happens using this getImage function. And again, essentially, it's the server-side version of what we're going to be doing on the client with the image in the picture element from Astro. So hopefully that gives you a general lay of the land of where you can put images and the 3 different tools available to you. In the next lesson, we're going to look really closely at this image component. In the last lesson, we got a nice overview of all the basic tools available to us in Astro with images. In this lesson, I want to look really closely at the image component. And we are going to keep it fairly basic and come back later in another lesson and fill out some other details we can do. So let's kind of reiterate what we've already learned. You need the image component here imported from Astro::assets. Then there's 3 places you can locate images from. One would be something in your SRC directory, like I have it in the assets directory right here. And all you have to do is then import that and you can use it down below. So let's come down here and recapture that. Here it is right here. We've imported it and added it right here. Now you can actually also use images from your public directory or a remote image in the image component as well. So let's talk about that next. So right here, I've got this image file right here. I could pass this in here instead. So let's come in here and let's just change this up. Now let me paste this in, and then let's go ahead and get rid of this upper image tag right here, and we'll get rid of this as well, and this, that's fine. So we should just have one image here. You'll notice though, when I go to save it, we're going to get an error. And that's because anything that's a remote image or an image that's in your public directory, you need to actually provide a width and height manually. That way it can account for cumulative layout shift. So let's go ahead and set this width. We'll do something like 400, and we'll also do height the exact same. And now it should load just fine. You'll notice though, if I were to come in here and I were to look at this, you'll notice it's done a couple of things. Like for instance, it has properly passed on the width and the height. It's added two attributes, loading equals lazy, and also decoding equals async, which we could alter if we wanted to. So if I came in here and said something like loading equals eager, which is the default, you'll notice that we will pass that on and it won't have it in here anymore. So here it is right here, loading equals eager. So if this is at the top of your page, you may want it to load right away rather than waiting until it gets closer to the viewport. But you'll notice something else importantly, and it's emphasized if I come over here to the network tab. Let's go ahead and reload this. You'll notice it's still a type of JPEG and it's just as big as it always was. So it's not actually optimizing it at all. It is just adding a few nice attributes, and it's accounting for cumulative layout shift. So it still does help, but not nearly as helpful as actually having it in your SRC directory where it can actually manipulate that file itself. So it hasn't made it smaller, it's just made it look smaller essentially. And it also hasn't really done anything with format. That doesn't affect it at all. Now you can also use this as a remote image. So let's come back over this way and let's go ahead and grab an image from here. Let's come back to Astro and let's just grab this one right here. So I'm going to copy the image address, and then right here we're going to add the entire URL of the image. Now let's come back over this way. You'll notice that I do get it in here and it actually does size it properly of width and height of 400. Now if I come inside here and refresh, you'll notice it's a WebP. That's actually because that's the image file itself. But other than that, it hasn't done any kind of transformation. So if I were to come back over here and add something like format equals JPEG, for instance, you'll notice it's not actually changing up the file, right? It's still a WebP image. In this way, currently it's acting just like an image in our public directory. So if I were to remove this height, you'll notice that it'll get angry with us and tell us I need both of them. Now there is a way to authorize certain domains to make sure that you're only ever optimizing images that you want to. And to do that, you'd actually open up the Astro config. So let's go ahead and open up astro.config.mjs, and I'm going to jump over here to the docs. If I scroll down this way, you're going to notice we get this authorizing image remote images. You can provide authorization in two different ways. Number one, you can provide just single domains. So if I have a list of domains like astro.build, I can add that. So in this case, this is what we would have. So let's come inside here, and inside the config, we're just going to add an image property where we'll pass on a string of domains. You could also just say, hey, I want only HTTPS domains. Anything works. So I'll just give you this pattern and you can just take care of it from there. So in other words, if you're using some kind of CMS or a CDN, you can just basically pass that along and it will just optimize them based on wherever you're getting that image from. So now that I've done that, if I come back over this way and we reload, you'll notice that it's actually optimized the image now. So it's now a JPEG image rather than a WebP image. Now in this case, that's the opposite of optimization, but you get the point. It's basically manipulating that file and then it will actually include it in your final build. So now we've looked at all three locations, the public, the remote image, and also an SRC image, something in your SRC folder. Now, one thing I should mention is if you're using PNPM as your package manager, you will also need to install Sharp, which is the image service this uses. It should actually tell you when you try to build that you need to have the package installed and tell you what to use, but it's just PNPM, I think PNPM I Sharp like this. And then that should use that and install it for you automatically. If you're using NPM or Yarn, you should be set to go. So let's talk about a few of the different properties you can pass on. The only two required ones are the SRC and the alt. So if you don't have an alt, you can just do it like this. What this says is this image is not important, so screen readers will not try to read out what it is, but it does say, hey, this signals to screen readers and other assistive technology, this image is not important. So always have an alt, even if it's just an empty alt. In this case, it would be whatever happens to be. Obviously, this is not Katie, this is whatever this graphic happens to be. Then with the SRC, you'll notice we had three different options. One is a remote image, you include the entire URL. And you need to authorize that domain then, and it will actually optimize those images for you. With a public directory image, you just start at the root of your site and whatever the file happens to be, image.jpg, or if it's in a folder, obviously you could provide that subdomain. And then finally, if you're talking about an image that you've imported up top, that would be an image from your SRC directory. You just want to have the image like that, the whole thing passed in. Remember, this Katie is what we happen to name the image right up here. Let's now talk about format. We've looked at a few already. We've looked at AVIF, which is a modern format. It will also always default to WebP. You can, of course, pass along JPEG or PNG or GIF, not GIF. And then let's talk about just one other option, and that is the quality. Now, the quality, you basically have two options. You can either provide a number between 0 and 100. All right, 0 and 100, whatever you want it to be. So let's say I want it to be like 60. But depending on the format you've picked, like WebP or AVIF or whatever, that will be interpreted differently by each of those images. So they've also given you some helpers if you'd rather provide those. What you can do is pick between high, load, max, or mid. And this essentially tries to have the same experience across whatever image formats you've decided on. So let's pick something like low, and I'll refresh this, and we should have Katie right over here. You can see how low is a lot different from something like mid, and even way different from something like max. So if you're really wanting to optimize your images, that's a nice way to do it. Obviously, that also changes the file size. And then lastly, like I mentioned, you can pass along anything else you would normally pass along to an image. So if I start to type here, you might see something like aria hidden. You can pass this along and say true, and it will add that just right onto the image like this. So it just forwards all of those things right on. So that's a basic look at the image component. We looked at public images, SRC images, and also remote images. Finally, we looked at several of the different properties that you can pass along, like width, height, format, quality, SRC, alt, and anything else that you can normally add to an image tag. In the next lesson, we want to look at how to optimize images in Markdown and MDX. All right, it's time to add images in MDX or Markdown. So let's go ahead and start just by, let's remove a lot of this stuff. I don't know why we need all that. And this too, just so we don't have console logs everywhere. And then next, let's go ahead and add another route. Now we're going to do that in the pages directory. Now you might remember that you can just have Markdown files here as routes as long as they're in the pages directory. So let's do something like image.md. All right, so it'll be just a normal image thing. And I could say like, hi, from Markdown. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and just make sure that that is working. If I come over here and manually go to image like this, it should say hi from Markdown, and it does, and it's clearly rendering that Markdown. Now, if I jump back over here to the image docs, you're going to notice the same three locations that we could look at before. So if I come over here, we've got something in our assets directory. This would be inside the SRC folder. We've also got something at the root of the directory. That would be our public image. And finally, we've got our remote image right here. Now notice that you just want to provide a relative file path for here. Here, obviously, this is the root of your site. It's going to look in your public directory, and here would be the full URL. So very much like what we did with the image component. And behind the scenes, it's essentially going to use that image component to do its normal optimizations. So the alt would go right here. This is how Markdown works. So we could be like Katie House. And right here, not inside quotation marks, we would just go up to the assets and then the image. If I jump back over this way, you're going to notice that there she is right there. All right, so just the same size as you might expect. Now, just to compare and contrast this, let's go ahead and come in here. We'll say like from SRC, and then I'm going to copy this down. We're going to do from public. So this will be something that Astro does not optimize. And again, this would just be at the root of the site, and it's also called image.jpg. Let's now come back over this way, and I'm going to look at the inspector. We'll look at the network tab. I've got image selected. I'm going to hard refresh here. You'll see that we've got that huge difference again, 506 versus 55.3. So this is the one from the SRC. This is the one from our public directory. So not being optimized, not being changed as far as its size, but it is actually properly referencing the image. Now, the last option we have is a remote image. Because I've already configured my domain to work with astro.build, let's just come in here and say like graphic for web stuff. All right, I don't remember what it was. And then we'll just have the entire image right here. Because it's an authorized domain, it has actually optimized this as well, or converted it to WebP, which is the default. It happens to be WebP already, so that's probably a bad example, but you get the idea. Now, if I jump back over here, you'll notice what we just did in the Markdown file. However, you also might want to actually use the image tag for an MDX file. This is one of the advantages of using something like MDX or MarkDoc as well, as you can import Astro components and use them inside of those files. So let me come down this way. You might remember in order for us to have MDX, we need to actually install it, and it is an official integration, which means I should be able to come and just say MPX, Astro add, and we'll do MDX. And here I'll say yes, you can install that, and yes, you can update the config, and then we'll get back up and running with npm run dev. All we need to do then now is come over here and open up the sidebar. We're just going to change this to say MDX. It should work the exact same, except you'll notice that we're going to have a few differences. Number one, I can't have these same comments, so let's get rid of these. And I'm going to jump back over this way, and everything should be working as normal. So you can write Markdown directly inside of an MDX file. That's kind of the point, but you can also do additional things on top of it. So if I come back over here, we can now import an image. Now, unlike our Astro files, any of our front matter is going to be up here, and then below the front matter is where we're going to import things like the image component. Let's pretend we have some front matter right here, which we don't, but that's fine. I'm just going to import the image now, and this image component will now be available to me down below. Now, just like with an Astro file, you have to actually import local files. You can just reference public directory files, and you can also reference remote images. So if I want Katie in here, I'm going to have to come over here and grab Katie. So let's come in here. Should be the exact same path. Let's just add her in right here. Now you'll notice that because it's Markdown, I can just use the normal Markdown syntax, but then I don't get things like width and height. So I might want to set a specific width, and I can now do that when it comes to using the image component. So let's come inside here. We'll just grab the image, And here I'm going to pass the src first of all. Because this is the one from the src directory, I'm just going to pass all of Katie. I'll do the alt here of Katie House. And then just because we can, I'm going to set a width here, and we'll do something like, I don't know, let's do like 50 or 500. How about that? Just to make it a little bit smaller, to make it clear that that's what we're doing. Now, I do need to go ahead and close off this image tag like that. We should be set to go. Okay, so if I come back over here, you'll notice that I've actually got the image pulling in right here. So it's actually changed the size for me, just like it would in a normal Astro component. Now, I can, of course, do the exact same thing right down here with a image in my public directory. In this case, I'm not going to point it at Katie. I'll just point it at my image.jpg. Now, it's going to error out of me, though, because I need to provide both a width and height, since it's something in the public directory. So we'll change this to height, and then we should be set and ready to go. Now, remember, it will not optimize this image, but it will actually give us the proper size right here. It's not actually making the image smaller, but it will at least look that size, right? The width and height will be 500. And then finally, not to belabor the point, but we can actually copy this down and use the same thing down this way. Once again, the remote image, I can just pass the entire path here, and since I've marked it as a domain that I can do this from, you'll notice that it will actually render it down this way in 500 by 500, which in this case is not the right thing, but that's okay. Let's do like 200. I don't know what it happens to be. That's closer to what it actually is. So in Markdown or MDX, you can see just how easy it is to work with these images. Astro just optimizes everything by default, and if you want more control, you can use MDX and pass in specific things like a width and a height. That will actually get the image just as small as you might need it. Now, there are some additional tricky things if you want to use images inside of content collections. We've done this in the past, but I just want to go over it one more time in kind of a singular lesson. So that's what we'll look at in the next lesson. All right, back to one of my favorite things in Astro content collections. And we've already set this up a couple times in previous projects, so I'll go fairly quickly through this. But what we need to do is, first of all, come in here and just add a new folder. We're going to call it content. That's what it needs to be called. And then we'll have a config.ts file. Now, in this particular use case, we're going to do a really basic one because the point is just to show how to work with images. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go ahead and have something. We'll just call it like image posts or something like that. And here we want to use the define collection from Astro content. So it should come in right there. Perfect. So for this helper, we're going to go ahead and pass in a few things. We'll have the type here be the type of content, and then we'll have a schema. So our schema here, we'll use the z.object. And we don't have Z pulled in, so I'm going to do Control and Spacebar, and that should pull this in from Astro Content. That'll work. We've got this object. Now in this case, let's say we wanted something like a title, and this could be a Z.string, and then maybe we have a date. This would be like a Z.date. Okay, so that might be our content collection. Now we need to export down here a const of collections. This would just be an object with all of these. So image posts is the only one I have currently, but if you had obviously other collections, you would add those here as well. So now what I need is a folder called image posts inside the content over here where we can add those Markdown or MDX files. So let's call this image posts because that's what it needs to be called. And then I'm just going to copy in over this right here. So since we've already got MDX installed in the project, we can use it here, or I can just change this back to Markdown and use it that way. So maybe let's just duplicate this to show how to work with both. So I'll come inside here. We'll have image.markdown. And here we'll do image.markdown like that. And then let's come down here and let's change this to -MDX just to kind of keep the two clear. Now I need to make sure that I have the same front matter in both of these. So let's come over here. We'll say title. This is like fake title 1. All right. And then we'll have a date. This will be 2024, 02, 12, whatever. That works. Let's copy this same stuff right here and jump over here and add it in. Okay. So now these should actually match the config I have set up over this way. Now let's go ahead and create a dynamic endpoint. Again, this is stuff we've done in the past, but this can be a little confusing. So let's go ahead and run it over it one more time. It won't hurt us to do that. We're going to do slug.astro. And inside here, let's just get rid of all this stuff. And inside here, we're going to use the get static paths function, where we're going to first get all the content collection for the specific content collection. This would be our image posts. So we'll say posts equals await get collection from Astro content. We're simply going to pass it the image posts. Now I'm not actually getting IntelliSense here because I haven't restarted the dev server. So let's just hope that that was the right spelling. Otherwise we'll have to redo this. Then all we're going to do down here is return our posts.map. And for each post, we're simply going to return an object. So let's wrap this like this, where we'll have a params, which will be our p.slug. And then we'll also render out a props, which will just be the entire thing we get back. Let's go ahead and restart the dev server, npm run dev, and that way we get our IntelliSense. You can also do Astro Sync, but it does it anyhow in the dev, so there's no reason to kind of do it separately. Okay, now down here, I should be able to get out here my props. So let's grab this from my props. And just to get nice type safety, let's come in here and do props equals. And we'll say that the P is a collection entry, and we're simply going to pass it the collection type. And that would be of image posts. All right, right up here, let's go ahead and add type here to make sure that TypeScript is happy there. Then we should be able to come down here, and for each individual route, we could just have like the p.data.title. All right, so let's see if this actually worked or if I messed something up. Should be able to come over here. We'll do image, and this was Markdown, I think. Okay, so we have some errors. That's all right. And let's see, I think right here what we need is this to be an object. This would be our slug, which is the same name as the file, and that would be our p.slug. And then we're going to do the same thing here, where we don't just return it like this. We actually have to return an object where we have whatever the thing is we want it to call. So let's just call it post, for instance, and then we'll pass back the entire thing here, which means this needs to also be changed to say post, as it does this right here. And now let's just change it here, and let's save it and hope we did everything correctly. Okay, there we go. So we've got the fake title being pulled in. All right, so we set up a basic content collection. Again, something we've done before. You may have even skipped to this section if you were like, hey, I got it. I don't need to reset that up. But I think it is good practice just to do it several times, because once you set it up once, it can be easy to forget. Okay, so what if we wanted to add an image to the front matter of each of these items? That's what we came to do here anyhow, right? So let's come back over here, and let's say that we want it to be a local image. First of all, it can work the exact same. So you'll notice right here, it's actually pulling in all this stuff. So if I were to come in here and just have the content, which you can get from a render function. So we'll say const content like this. This will be from post.render. I can just input this directly down this way. So content like this, and all of it will just pull in down here. However, remember that these were relative image paths. And now that this has changed, I need to actually change where this is at. So it needs to go up an extra level first, like this, and then it should work. Well, it should work if I await that, because I don't think I awaited it. So let's come back over here, sorry, one more time, and await, and now it should render it. All right, so all that should work properly just like before. Just remember that those are relative image paths. Now, what happens if I want a front matter image up top here to be rendered down below? Well, let's go back ahead and open up my config, and I now want an image inside of here. Now, of course, I can just make this a string, so we can say something like this. We'll come in here and do like a z.object, where we'll have two things. We'll have an src, and this could just be a z.string, and that should work just fine. And the other thing I can do is here is have an alt, and this will also be a z.string. So I can do that. You'll notice I get an error right away because I need to add both of these. So I'll just come back over here, and we'll have an image where we have two different properties. One will be an src. This will just be a relative path. So like this, assets, image.jpg. I can also have an alt. This would be kitty house. Now that should work just fine. Let's also come over here and do the same thing here. And now both of those should work just fine. The problem is that we don't actually know whether or not this exists. So one of the benefits of content collections is that you want to be able to see, is this an actual file? What size is it? Well, you can do all that by passing along a helper here. So before you return this object here, you can simply extract out, destructure out an image like this. This image is a special helper that verifies the image actually exists. Now, this only works for things inside your src directory. But if you want to verify those as actual images, you can put them in right here. Now, we can also do additional things like refine it. Here, we could just simply pass along whatever we want to call it. Let's call it an image. And we can say that the image.width has to be like greater than, I don't know, like 20 or something. 200, how about that? So that should work just fine. But if I change it to 2000, you'll notice that it says, hey, this doesn't match because it needs to be a certain size. And I can even pass along a special message if I want to. This would be in an optional object right here. And I could just pass along a message that says something like, your image must be at least 2000 pixels wide. All right, so now I actually get this exact error right here that tells me what the problem is. Let's back this off just so that it works properly. And now that I've got this image, I can render it wherever I want to. Now, I'm not going to render it inside of the post over here. That's obviously I can do that in MDX if I wanted to. Let's go ahead and move this up just so we can double check that this is working. And let's just double check before I close down this lesson. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so those are both working properly. However, what I might want to do is render the image right here. Here, once again, I have access to my image component. Image like this, I can pull this in, and I can do all the exact same things. The src in this case would be from my post.data.image.src, right? Because that's what we named it. Same thing for the alt here. And now this should render right up top here, right below the fake title. Now it's hard because I'm using a lot of these same images, but we're actually pulling this from the front matter. So let's walk through that one more time because I know we spent a lot of time setting up the content collection, but I just wanted one more practice at it. You'll notice that in any file that has a content collection here, you can have things referenced like images. If it's images in the front matter, if you want to verify that it's an actual image file, you need to actually pull in the image helper when you're defining your content collection. If it's an image in the body of the file, it would be just the same as any other Markdown or MDX file. It should render just the exact same. But those front matter images can now be verified. You can even refine them to make sure they're a certain size, and then you can output them with the image component wherever you happen to render it. In this case, it happens to be a dynamic route, but of course you may set that up in any way you like. In the next lesson, we're going to look at how to use images in UI frameworks like React. Now, you can't actually use an Astro helper in any of those frameworks, just like all the Astro helpers, but there is a way to actually output the image tag, the final kind of rendered image tag, and pass that along to a UI framework. That's what we're going to look at in the next lesson. So far, we've looked at several things you can do with images in Astro. We've mostly focused on the image component. What we have not yet talked about is how to use the image component in UI frameworks. That's because you can't really. All right. So basically, there are two ways you can use images in your SRC directory inside of a normal like React or some kind of UI framework component. One would just be to use a normal image tag. And just like in React normally, you have to go ahead and import that image, and it's just a relative path, and then you can use it inside of your React component. You can, however, if you want to, actually pass the entire image after it's been rendered down here to the image component. So this would be inside of an Astro route, but you have a React component embedded inside of it. You can pass this as one of the children. Now, you can either use an image component like this, you could also use the picture component, or you can actually use the getImage function if you're generating all the stuff up here and then pass it down here as well. But generally, if you just want a final image tag, it would make sense to me that you'd actually pass down the whole thing as a component here. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to start by using React. Now, if you jump over here, you're going to notice that we do have some errors, and that's just because I didn't clear out everything. So if I come over here to the image Markdown file, you'll notice we've got some stuff in here that shouldn't belong in Markdown, like this, and like this, and like this. None of this is Markdown. That's why we were getting some trouble over here, and you can't import down here either. So if I look at this, now it should have gotten rid of all that. There we go. So now everything is working properly. So in case that concerned you, that's what was going on over there. But let's go ahead and kill the dev server, and I'm going to go ahead and add in React. So that's just npx astro add React. And we can use this because it's an official extension. It'll actually install everything we need and update our config for us automatically so we can start using React inside of our Astro project. So first of all, yes, I will let it install those dependencies. And then yes, I'll update the config and the TS config. That works too. Okay, so now we can just do npm run dev and get that back up and running. Let's close this down and let's go ahead and open up the sidebar and create a little React component. I'm just going to come inside here. We'll create a components directory. Now let's just call this like React wrapper. All right, I've got a little shorthand here, REFCE, that will spit out this little React component. And we will, inside of here, just go ahead and grab the children and render out the children down this way. Obviously, not a whole lot going on here as far as React is concerned, but basically we're passing in children and we're going to pass them down this way. Now, if I want to, I can go ahead and type this since I'm using TypeScript. Children are always a React node, so I should be able to import that. And there we go. So now the children down here will be whatever I pass into it. Let's go ahead and then use this inside of our project. I'm going to come over to the index route and just right down here, let's see. Let's go ahead and copy this for now. We'll repaste it here in a second. All I'm going to do is come in here and add this React wrapper. So I'll just start typing React wrapper, and there you go. You should see it being imported up top. Now, because I'm going to have children, I need both a starting and a closing tag. And then inside here, I'm going to repaste in that image element. So now I can actually pass down the image, the rendered image tag, as a child of that React wrapper. You'll notice that that import came in right here, and we're just rendering out static HTML. Now, the way that Astro works by default, this is not actually dynamic React. It's just using React essentially to render the HTML. To make it interactive, you have to use a client directive, and we might do something like visible. So when it's visible on the screen, then you can load all the React needed. Now, in this case, I don't have anything interactive, so I don't really need this. I'm just going to use React to render HTML essentially. All right, so let's come back over this way, and let's go ahead and come back to the home page. There we go. Now we've got this image component inside of a React wrapper. Now, just to make sure it's clear that it's actually inside this React wrapper, let me go ahead and come inside here, and let's just add a paragraph. We'll do like inside wrapper, and then down here, we'll paste back in the children. Now you can see that this is all being rendered essentially by the React component. Notice though that I've just got my normal image tag that I passed down from that Astro Image component. Now, of course, like we mentioned a moment ago, you can also, of course, import like Katie from, and I can go up to my assets and look at my image, and I can render this as well. So this would just be a normal image tag. Now here, because I'm using an actual image tag, I need to actually pass in katie.src, the actual source of the image file, because I'm not using the Astro Image component, because you can't use that inside of a React component directly. Then I'd probably want to add some kind of alt, whatever that happens to be. Now you'll see that the entire image loads, but it's not optimized. It's just the full image right here. So obviously the advantage of passing in it as a child is you get all the optimizations you want. However, when it comes to just using an image, it's just like using any other kind of image in React. So that's how you can use Astro's images inside of front-end UI frameworks. In the next lesson, I want you to get your hands dirty and actually do some of this image practice yourself. Now, hopefully it all makes sense and seems easy. That means I explained it well. However, if you really want to know if you know it, you have to try it. And that's what we're going to do in the next lesson. All right, it's time to actually test to see if you know how to do this in real life. Now this is a starter code that you can find in the description attached to this lesson. You'll notice that there's a README in here. Other than that, it's the same as what we started with when we first worked on this image module. So let's go ahead and just work through these things one at a time. So let's go ahead and start. It says in an Astro component, render public, local, and remote images. Now you can use whatever public images you want, but since we were using that one already from Astro, let's just go ahead and continue to do that. So I'm going to come over here, we'll look in the pages directory, and this is what we're going to do. So we've got one already here in the SRC directory. Let's copy this over to the public so we can use this as well. And then let's render all three of those. Now what I'm going to do is just come up here and we're going to have public, then I will also have local, and finally let's go ahead and have remote. Okay, so let's go ahead and render these as you might want to, and I'm going to render them all with the image component. So image like this, and it should come in from Astro Assets. Now the first thing I'm going to do is pull in the public directory one. Now this is just a path on the base of my site, and since it's called image.jpg, that's what we're going to do. And we'll just call this Katie House because that's who it is. All right, so that should pull that in. However, in the public images, you have to provide both a width and a height. So let's come in here and I'm going to provide that. And it's a square image, so I can kind of make this whatever I want. Let's do something like 400, and the height here will be the same. Okay, so there we go, that pulled in. Actually, let's make it a little bit smaller just so we can see the other ones as they come in here as well. Okay, so that's the public one. Let's go ahead and copy this down, and we're going to do the same thing for the local one. Now, this local one here, we're not going to pull from here. Instead, we're going to import it up top here because it's inside the SRC directory. So let's call it Katie from, and then let's go up, assets, and then image right there. So let's grab Katie. We're just going to pass the entire thing right inside here. So just like this. And I can have all the rest of this the exact same. That should work just as fine. And notice this is a lower quality. That's because it's kind of doing some of that optimization to start with. You can increase that quality if you want to, but the other thing that's cool is it's going to be way, way smaller if we inspect that, which we should do. So let's go ahead and do that just to double check. Yeah, there we go. So we've got what, 506 versus 2.2 kilobytes, and it's a WebP versus a JPEG. So big difference, even though they look about the same. Okay, next one is we want this remote image. So once again, let's copy this down. And what we're going to do is switch out a couple things. So first of all, let's just get rid of this alt, and we'll just say it doesn't have one for now. Next, we're going to add the full URL of the image path right here. So I went ahead and pasted that in, and it should show for me. There we go. And of course, the sizing isn't quite right because it's different than whatever the other one was. Something like that, that should work. Now, this will actually not optimize this at all. So if we wanted to optimize it, we have to add that domain as one of those options inside of our Astro config. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up, astroconfig.mjs. And right inside here, we're going to have the image, and we'll look at the domains, and we'll simply pass to astro.build. So as soon as we do this, it tells Astro you can actually take images from this domain, and you can do your magic on them using the Astro Image component. Now that means I can come in here if I want to, and I can add other things like a format. I can say this needs to be JPEG. And now if I come in here and look at this, it should actually be a JPEG. Let's go ahead and refresh, and there you go. So it's a JPEG, even though it came in as a WebP. So that tells me it actually is optimizing it. Now, one thing I did not mention is that you can actually update this to not use the width and height, but instead just infer this directly from the URL if it's a remote image and if you've went ahead and configured that in your image settings. How do you do that? Well, let me come back over here, and it's right here with this infer size. This is a brand new option you have. All you have to do is add the infer size here, and it will do this for you so you don't have to figure that out. Now notice here that you can add infer size to the getImage function, which we have not yet looked at, or you can add it to any of these that are using a remote image. However, if you have not authorized that domain, it will not optimize it. It's just going to infer the size from it. So let's go ahead and shut this down. I'll get rid of that format over here, and there it is. It pulls it in over this way. So what it's doing is it's inferring the size and actually displaying it exactly as you'd expect based on the image it's getting back when it goes and fetches that image remotely. Okay, so I think we did everything there. Let's go ahead and mark this one as good. Next, in Markdown, render a public, local, and remote image. We're going to do something very similar to all of this. So let's go ahead and start by creating a new route. We'll just call this like sample.md. All right, so inside the sample.md, we're going to grab all three of those. So let's have a public one, let's have a local one, and let's have a remote one. So first of all, for the public, this is how you do rendered Markdown. We'll say Katie House, and then we're just going to reference this in our root of our directory. So this would just be image.jpg. And just to make sure we can actually see this, let's come over this way and we'll look at sample. Okay, so there we go. We got this one pulled in. Next, we're going to look at a local one. This would be inside the SRC directory. Again, this is going to be Katie House because that's who it is. And we're just going to relatively reference this. So we need to go up a level, then into assets, and then finally the image.jpg. And that one should come in down here, and it's a WebP. You can see that down this way. Finally, our remote image, we should be able to do this the exact same way. We'll just do like random graphic, and we'll just add the entire thing as a string here. And if I save it, it should pull in down this way. Again, Astro is doing all that stuff for us automatically. Now with both of these two, it's going to optimize them. You'll notice that down this way. With this one up here, it's not doing any optimization. It's just dropping the file in exactly as it found it in the public directory. Okay, so we did that. Let's come over here and check that off. Change the width and height of an image using the image component. So let's come back over this way. This is not something we did intentionally, but I guess we did ahead of time, right? So all you have to do is change this to like 150 and 150, change this to 200 and 200. We can even change this one as well. So we could say we want the width, and this could be, I don't know, 400, and the height could be something like, what, 150, 160, something like that. So let's come back to the homepage, and there we go. We've got all of them, and we actually changed the image size. So we did that one early. That's okay. All right, now the big one, number 4 and number 5, creating an entire content collection just to show how this works. Let's do it, all right? Another example of just working with these over and over again to kind of get the sense of it. So I'm going to come inside here. We're going to add a new folder called content, and we'll add a config.ts. Now, the very first thing I want to do is define a collection. So let's just call this like posts equals define collection. I should get this from Astro content, and that pulls right in. And in here, we want to set it as a type. In this case, I want this to be a content type. And then I'm also going to have the actual schema. So let's add that schema. And here we need to go ahead and pull in Z, which is Zod, as given to us by Astro. Now, remember, if we're going to have this Z.object where we're going to pass an image in, first of all, I need to come over here and grab an image. So let's grab the image like this. This is this little helper that Astro gives us. And then we're going to return Z.object. So we could have a bunch of things in here. In this case, let's just have an image. So I'm going to have the image be my image, or maybe I should call this like cover or something like that just to make sure it's clear. So we pulled this in. Now we need to create a post collection and then export this. So let's export const collection, and here it's just going to be posts. Over this way, let's go ahead and then add a folder in here. We're going to call this posts, and inside here we're going to have a markdown file. We'll call it like 1.md. Up top here, I know I need an image. This is a relative path. Typically what I like to do is I like to put these images, if they're just connected to the post, directly inside of here. You can have it as a subdirectory or just nested right next to it. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll put it right next to it. Then all we're going to do is import that image. It was called cover, and here we're just going to do a relative path. In this case, same exact area, image.jpg. Now this should work for us. If I come back over this way, let's go ahead and pull this in. So I'm going to say const post equals get entry. We're just going to get our single entry in. And in order to actually get access to this, let's go ahead and do npm run dev. Again, this should give us all the types we need so it knows exactly which content collection options we have available to us. So there we go. If I hit Control and Spacebar, it shows me that. And then it shows me that I have one post, just that one right there. So if I come over here, it should tell me exactly what it is. And it looks like it doesn't know what it is. So let's come back over here. Let me make sure. Export const collections. Sorry about that. So that should be right. And now I should be able to pull this in and use this post down below. So let's go ahead and just duplicate this up, and we'll call this something like content collections just to keep it straight. Content collections. And now instead of passing in this path to the public image, we're simply going to take our post, I think that's what we called it, .data.cover, and pass that entire thing in here. So it should show up right there, and it does, and we're getting this all from the content collection front matter. Of course, if it's just a markdown file that we're using as like rendered content, we can use it just like we would this sample MD right here where we just import it the same exact way. And it should use it. But in this case, what we're doing is picking that off of the front matter and then rendering it out, which I think is what was asked us to do here. Yeah, number 4, content collection with a verified image. I guess we didn't even have to render it, but little bonus points. Okay, next, verify the image is at least greater than or equal to 1,000 pixels. So let's come back over this way. And you might remember that you can refine this using Zod, where you just call it whatever you want. We'll call it image. We'll just say that the image.width has to be greater than or equal to 1,000. And I saved it there. You'll notice that our image actually doesn't fit that. So maybe let's cut this back. Let's do like 700. That should work. And then you can pass in an optional message here. So let's just say like your image must be at least 700 pixels. All right, and now if I change both of these to 1,000, it should error out on us because that does not work, and I actually get a custom message here in my front matter. Okay, cool. So that all worked for us. Let's change this back to 700 just so it stops yelling at us, and let's do the final thing over here. So let's check this one off, and then finally pass a rendered image to a UI framework like React. So you know what we have to do, npx astro add react. Let's add this first of all, and then we'll render this and embed it inside of a React component. So yes, I'll go ahead and install that. Sure, update my config and my tsconfig, that'll work. npm run dev, let's get this back up and running, and let's open up the sidebar and add a React component. So let's just come over here, we'll do component, and here we'll just call it React wrapper once again, .tsx, and I'm just gonna go ahead and get this ready. We'll add in a child here this child or these children will simply be a type React node, and I can import that from React. Now all I have to do is add that directly here. We'll do children down this way. And again, just to make sure that it's clear that we're getting this in here, we'll do like React image, and maybe let's put it at the bottom here, like end React image. Here will be begin React image. Okay, so all I have to do now is pass a rendered child here to this React wrapper. So let's close this down, come back over this way, and let's do this one more time. So right here, we're going to do React wrapper. I should be able to import that by hitting enter. There we go. And now all I'm going to do is render it directly here. Now, I can't have that be self-closing, can I? Because it has to be a child. So let's pass the children in here. And in this case, I just want it to be basically the exact same thing as I have right here. So let's bring this up. Except in this case, I'm not going to pass in the data from the content collection. I guess I could. But really, probably what I would do is import the image up top like I already did in that Katie, and it should show here. So now I've got begin React image, end React image, our content collection, the public one, the local one, and the remote one. So by my count, I think we did everything. All right, well, I hope that was a big help to you, and practicing it made sure you understood how it worked and were actually able to play around with it yourself. Now, starting with the next lesson, we're going to get a little bit more advanced with these images, looking at different widths you can pass in or densities. We'll look at the picture element. We'll look more closely at that getImage function. And finally, we'll do some more practice at the very end. So hopefully at this point, you have a really good sense of how to work with the image component at a very basic level. But now what we want to do is take this and kind of add some extra things on top of what we already know. So if I come down here, let's go ahead and remove a bunch of these just to make it a little bit easier to see what we're working with. So I'm going to get rid of all this. We'll just use this one local image, and we won't worry about the remote one, although this same thing would apply for all of these. So anytime you can actually optimize an image, so a local image in the SRC folder or a remote image where you've verified that domain, you can use these same techniques. And then I'm going to save this. That way we got just this one right here and jump over to the image docs. Now what I want to look at is two things that are connected to these properties. We've looked at the SRC already. That's required. Alt as well. The width and the height, like we said, is required for public, or you have to infer that from a remote image. But what I want to look at now are these two other options. One would be densities, and the other one is widths. Now, densities allows you to set up several different types of images based on the user's screen resolution. So you can see down here what I can do is I can pass in some densities right here. And what this will do is create two different versions of this image. So let's go ahead and do that. And then let's save it and come over this way. Now, if I inspect this, you're going to see that Astro has now added a couple of extra things. So notice it's got not just a SRC attribute, but it's also got a source set attribute. The source set attribute has two different images, one at 1.5 resolution and the other at 2. What this allows for is for the user's device to choose whichever image best fits its own pixel resolution. In other words, you're providing a more optimized experience so the user only has to load the image that best fits their device. Now, that's one option. You can also create a source set property using this other technique. And that would be to add a widths, and if you do that, you also have to add a sizes attribute as well. Now, it is a choice between these two. You can either have densities or widths and sizes. So let's go ahead and copy this right here, and I'm just going to grab all this, and we'll drop this in here. Now, what this is doing, let's go ahead and update this. So this image.width is going to be the same as our Katie.width, and same thing down here will be Katie.width. Now notice what it's going to do. We've got 1, 2, 3, and then the original size of the image right here. Those correspond to these media queries where we've got a max width of 360 pixels. It's saying, hey, go ahead and choose this one for that. If it's a max width of 720, it chooses this one, etc., etc. So let's go ahead and get rid of this width and height. And that way we're just going to use the default, which I think is 1,000 pixels either direction or 950, something like that. Now, here's the benefit of this. Now, instead of choosing from pixel densities, it's actually choosing from the widths of the screen. So if I save this here, and let's go ahead and look at the network tab. So if I do this, you're going to notice that it's pulled in a certain image. If I then change the screen size, it'll actually update which image it pulls in. So notice it's actually pulled in another image. And this one's significantly smaller because it doesn't need the entire size image. So once again, you're allowing the user's device to choose which image they want. And if I get a little bit kind of in between the two, now you see it pulls in my third image. So you've got tons of different options now. That way the user only ever downloads the one that they need. And if they happen to change their screen size or resolution, it will actually grab the image and just replace it right there. Again, all this is built into browsers. This just allows you to pass this on to the image property. And the cool thing is Astro will basically make all of these live for you when you build your site. So these two options, densities or widths and sizes, allow for a more optimized experience for your end user. Not only do you have a more compressed image, but then you've got several images that the browser can choose between. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at the picture component, which gives us yet more options to give more optimization to the end user. In this lesson, we want to take everything we've learned about the image component and apply it now to the picture component and add a few extra things on top of it. So the first thing I'm going to do is just come over here, and we're going to switch this out for the picture component. I've already imported it up top by hitting enter, so it should pull in right up there. Let's get rid of this since we won't need this anymore. And I guess we got some other stuff up here we don't need either, so let's get rid of this as well. Okay, so down this way, we've now got this as a picture component. What has this changed? If I come over here, you're going to notice that a lot of the same things apply. However, it's done something different. So if I come in here, you're going to notice I have a picture tag. However, inside of here, I now have the image tag, and that has all the same things we've already seen, the source set, all this kind of stuff. So why would you use something like this? Well, in HTML, the picture tag doesn't just allow for something like this, where you've got different sizes. It also allows for different variants of images. So you could have like a JPEG and also a WebP and also an AVIF, and just let the user's device choose whichever one it can actually use on that web browser. So if it's a more modern device, it can use the more modern formats, and if not, it's got a fallback format. And notice it does a lot of this in this source tag. So let's take advantage of the abilities of this picture component. If I come back over this way, you're going to see that we've got some additional things we can add. For instance, we can add formats. So multiple formats instead of a single format. So formats like this. Now I can pass in multiple different formats. So this needs to be an array, and I could pass in something like AVIF, and I could also pass in something like WebP. Now, again, one of the advantages here is that I can pass in a fallback format that I know will be supported on every browser, so maybe like JPEG. And the order of these is important. You want to do the most modern ones first, so like AVIF and WebP, and then kind of the fallbacks at the very end, JPEG. So that's one option you can add. Now, if I come over here, you're going to notice that we've got a ton of images now generated by Astro, and only the ones that are needed will actually be loaded. So here I've got sources for the JPEG images, here I've got sources for the WebP images, and here I've got sources for the AVIF images. It'll try these, and then finally these if it can't reach any of these other ones. Now, in addition to the different formats you can also pass a fallback format. This is the fallback value for the image tag itself, and by default, it's PNG. So if I come over this way, this is the one I want right here to actually default to PNG. And it looks like it's defaulting to JPEG here, and that may be because it's a JPEG, and maybe if it's a PNG, it'll default to PNG. I'm not sure. Maybe the documentation needs to be updated there. But I can't update this to anything I want. So if I say fallback format, maybe I say I want it to be PNG, and now if I come back over here, it should have updated this to use PNGs instead, and you see that's what it's doing. The other option I can pass in is a pictures attribute. So by default, if you pass along any attributes here, it's not going to apply it to the picture tag. It'll actually apply it to the internal image tag. Let me show you what I mean. So if I was using something like Tailwind and I came in here and I said class like width full or something like that. Now, if I come back over this way and we inspect where that's at, you'll notice that it's actually added it to the image tag inside of the picture tag, not to the actual picture tag itself. So this can be a little confusing when you first start working with the picture tag. So how do you get stuff to go to the picture tag? Well, you've got an object you can pass along called picture attributes. So I can now pass this along. So it's an object here. So let's say I have something like class, and I can simply pass along something like, I don't know, width like 28 or something like that. Obviously, I'm not actually using Tailwind in this project, so it won't do anything. But you'll see now if I come back over this way, it says class width 28. So it's actually passed along here. Now you can do other things like style and pass along some style tag like display of none, which will hide the whole thing altogether. But you'll notice that it is actually there, right? And it's attaching it to the actual picture wrapper. They give a couple of other examples you may want. So if I come over here, you'll notice it's saying you could apply things like a background color equals red. But the whole idea is that with this picture attributes, you can actually attach things to the tag, the picture itself. Anything else you put up here will just be passed along to the internal image tag. Other than that, the picture tag works just like the image tag. Again, it just gives you more flexibility by not just providing different sizes, but also different formats. That means we've now looked at two of the three tools that we have available to us in Astro, the image component and the picture component. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the function that you use server-side called getImage. We've now looked at two of the three tools that Astro gives you to work with images. Both of them have been client-side. In other words, something that you're actually going to generate an image tag directly in the actual HTML of your component. Here would be the image and then also the picture tag. Now what we want to do is look at the server-side function getImage. The only difference between the two is that this relies on server-only APIs, so you have to use it somewhere in the server. That gives you basically two options. You can either use it in the front matter, like right here, or perhaps some kind of API route, something that's called server-side. So as an example, let's go ahead and just take this one that they're giving us right here, because perhaps you want to return some kind of background image and apply that here in a style tag. And maybe you want to do this work just from the server. Well, we can do that in the front matter right up here. Let's just go ahead and drop this in here, and we're just going to swap out my background for Katie. Now we also need to go ahead and hit Control and Spacebar to pull in the getImage function here from Astro Assets. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this picture one because we won't need this one anymore. Let's come down here and get rid of all this right here, just like that. Okay, cool. Now what we can do is get the results of this in an object. If I were to console log this and open up the terminal, you're going to see we get all this stuff back from this getImage function. You see we get the raw options. This would be the original location, format, width, height, all this kind of stuff of the image. And then we also get what we've decided to change it to. So we've got stuff like encoding equals async and loading equals lazy, all these other things. If we were to change the width and height, which you can also do in the function if you want to, those would show up here as well. Now the benefit is we've got access to this as an object. So I can come down here just like they've done, and let's go ahead and do this. I'm just going to copy all this right here, and I'm just going to drop it right over here. This does need to be in a style tag, of course. But now if I come back over this way, you're going to see that the entire background of my body is this image. Now this is happening because we're picking off this optimized background and dropping it in right here, just taking just the source property here and applying it to the image tag for the background image. Now let's jump back over here to see some other options we have available to us. We can actually pass in options. We've passed in obviously a format right here, but we can pass in other additional options here, and that's what will get returned to us in that object. So for instance, if this was a remote image, I could pass in infer size. But I could also pass in something like a width. So if I do something like 240, now that will be passed along with the rest of this. Now if I come back over here, you're going to see that it's now 240 pixels wide. So anything that you can pass into an image component, you can pass in here as well. Well, I should mention is not anything, actually the alt attribute, I believe you cannot pass in yet right here. So it takes in all these same ones as the image component, except the alt property. Now, obviously we're just doing this here in the front matter, but you could also build this into like your own little custom image component. Now, before they created everything that you've now got available to you, they created this recipe so you can kind of do it yourself if you wanted to. This recipe shows doing this in an Astro component. And notice that they're passing along options for both the mobile and also a desktop option. And then they're actually hand generating a picture element, very much like what you get right now with the picture element down this way and returning it over here. Now, the cool thing about this recipe is it allows for different images for both mobile and desktop. So that might be something you want. Maybe you have one image for a desktop, one image for mobile, and depending on what the screen size, you want to return something different. Well, you could actually create your own little custom component like this. All that is done server side, and then you just return HTML very much like the image or picture component. Then you would simply call it like this, and you could pass along different images to that, and then return your own custom component. What would this return? But the actual picture component right here, it just allows for different images for both mobile and desktop. So that would be one example of where you might want to use the getImage function. I hope now you feel really confident in understanding the different tools available to you in Astro when it comes to working with images. In the next and final lesson in this module, we're going to put this to the test one more time with a bunch more practice. Are you ready to put your skills to the test? Let's go ahead and do some practice image exercises. And what I'm going to encourage you to do once again is to make sure you've got the image docs open. And if you get stuck, look there, try to find the answer, and then you can follow along with the video after that. So for each of these, I would do it and then play the video, etc., back and forth. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the very first one. Use the image component to create multiple images with different pixel densities. So I'm going to come over this way, and let's just go ahead and come into the body, and let's grab the image component. This should come from Astro::assets, and it does. Cool. Now, we need to go ahead and import the image so that we can optimize it. So we're going to want to use the one in the src directory, which happens to be, where's this at? Under assets image. So we'll say import, and we'll just keep calling this Katie from up. We'll go to assets and then image.jpg. Now this right here is what we're going to use as the source, like this. And we'll just pass the entire thing in once again. And then of course we've got the alt. This will be Katie house. All right, now the instructions here were to use an image component to create multiple images with different pixel densities. So we can do that if I jump back over this way with this densities property. So they provide a few density property options right here. So let's just go ahead and pass these in. This is an array of numbers. And we can also perhaps, if we wanted to, set like a width as well. So let's set something like 400 just to make it reasonable so that we can actually see it on the page. So back over this way, there we go. And if I were to inspect this, this should have worked. We've got multiple pixel densities. And there we go. So we've got one for 1.5 and one for 2. Now, of course, you can add additional ones here as well. So maybe you have one for 4, and it just continues to kind of go up one after the other. Okay, so that's number 1 all done. Next, use the image component to create multiple images for different screen sizes. So this would be using the widths property along with the sizes property. Here are some examples right here. So let's go ahead and just steal this. And we'll again use their example here just to speed this up a little bit on my side. So let's go ahead and use this exact same one. I'm just going to copy it down and comment out the previous one. Now here, you cannot have both densities and this widths option. So I need to remove the densities and then we'll pass these in. Now this image here needs to be the name of the file that I've imported, which is Katie. So it'll be katie.width, etc., etc. Now, because of the way we've set these things up, we need to make sure that basically the largest one, which would be whatever the default width is going to come in at this size. So I either have to change these media queries or simply remove this since my image already is like 900 pixels, 950 pixels, something like that. And now this should create exactly what we want. So let me come back over this way. We'll check in here. And yep, we've got a bunch of different sizes here. Now I could, of course, add additional ones if I want to. So let's say I added one more. We said something like 850 just to kind of give an example here. Now notice for all these, you have like max width, whatever it happens to be, make it this size. So we would do the exact same thing here. So let's just go ahead and copy this in like this. And what we're going to do is set this to something like, I don't know, 1800 pixels. And we'll say that this should be 850. So now we've got another option here that shows, just to show how you would do that. And you just want to think through what you want the image size to be at each of those different screen widths. But by my count, that makes number 2 done as well. Next, we need to set the JPEG as the fallback for the picture component. So we have to actually get the picture component on here. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to go ahead and copy all this down actually like this. And then once again, we'll comment this out just so we can see just kind of one image at a time. Okay, down this way, let's go ahead and import the picture component. And all I want to do is provide a fallback here. Now, if I remember from last time, it actually already used the JPEG as the fallback, but let's just pretend that didn't happen. And there we can actually pull this in here and just double check that that's actually working. Yeah, that should be JPEG. Just to make sure this is actually having an impact though, let's change this to PNG and just make sure that it's actually creating this as the fallback. Yep, PNG for all those. Okay, perfect. But just to make sure we're by the spec, I'm going to change that back to JPEG. All right, so that's number 3 done as well. Next, we want to add the picture component with multiple formats and sizes. So we've already got one with multiple sizes right here. All I have to do is copy it down, and now we'll have one for multiple formats as well. So I need to provide the formats property, formats, and then let's go ahead, not format, but formats, and then we'll go ahead and provide this as an array, and I'll just have different formats available here. So what are some options? Well, we've got AVIF, and if I do comma, and let's see what else we want. Maybe let's do WebP as well, and then finally, maybe let's do JPEG. All right, so now we should have multiple sizes and multiple formats down this way. Let's see. Yep, multiple sizes and they're multiple formats. There's AVIF, here's WebP, here's JPEG. Let's just throw PNG in there and just have a party. All right, PNG. Now we've got another option here for us as well. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we've got a fallback as well with JPEG. It's pretty incredible that Astro can create all this kind of on the fly with just a little bit of direction from you. Okay, back over this way. Let's do number 5. Use the getImage function to generate an image with an alternate format. So back over this way, let's go ahead and comment this out. All right, up top here, this has to be server side, so let's go ahead and do it in the front matter here. getImage, again, this comes from Astro:assets, and here I need to pass in a couple of things. I have to pass in the source. This is just going to be Katie, and then this is something that needs to be awaited. So we'll say like op_image, something like that, equals await getImage. Now we want to pick a different format than the default, which is the JPEG. So I'm going to pass in a format here, and we'll simply say this needs to be AVIF. Now by default, this will generate a WebP image, so that's why I'm choosing AVIF, just to show a different option. And then let's go ahead and console log this just so we can actually see it's working. Okay, so if I come down here, there we go. We've got an AVIF as our image type. That's what we want. All right, I think that leaves just one left, and that would be to apply the generated image as a background image to the page. So let's go ahead and do that. Back over this way, I'm going to come over to the body right here. We're going to add a style declaration. And because I'm going to do some dynamic stuff inside here, let's go ahead and put this in backticks. We'll say background image, and then this is URL, and we just simply need to pass it the URL of the optimized image. In this case, that would be optimage.src, because that's the actual URL that it will generate. So right over here, we see we've got this now as a background image. So that's all 6 generated and done. Hopefully that was helpful to kind of walk through this and do it on your own. If you get stuck at any point, feel free to leave a comment in the Discord, and I'll do my best to help you.